Good morning. My name is Keisha Schlegel, and I'm the Brownfields coordinator for the city of Missoula, your host for this event, your co-host for this event. If you have any questions during the day, feel free to ask me. I'm here to help you out, here to direct you to the best coffee shops other than the one right there. And I am very, very pleased that all of you are here. I'd like to introduce you to our NALJEP friend. Her name is Farley Wolf. NALJEP is a very long acronym, and if you know what it means, perhaps you'll get a door prize later, so check in with me. Right now, I'd like to introduce you to Farley. Please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Farley. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're so pleased you could be here. I just want to give you a little quick background about why we're here today. Keisha approached me at a NALJEP conference in 2006 and said, Missoula, we need to have a Brownfields regional workshop. And I said, excellent, I'd love to come to Missoula. And so that's why we're here. NALJEP runs Brownfields workshops because we have a generous grant from EPA to host workshops throughout the country about this particular issue. And this is our last one in the fiscal year, and I think that it's going to be one of our best. So I'm very excited that everyone is here today, and I'm so excited to see I know we have people that have come from over the so I want to give you a quick background. Being here in the morning, and then we will be moving across the street to City Hall. We'll give you more information about that as the time grows closer. And then this evening at around 4:30, we're having a walking tour of a site, and we'll give you more information about that as well. I just quickly want to thank, of course, the City of Missoula and EPA. I also want to thank all of our partners and sponsors. We have information about our partners and sponsors in the room right behind you, which is an exhibitor room, so feel free to take any information that you need from that room, and if you have any questions, please let Keisha or I know. We're happy to answer them. Also quickly, if you need water, there are cups in the room where you got your coffee. We're waiting for the water to arrive. But there's a fountain at the end of the hall, or there's a kitchen between the front door and the second set of doors if you'd like to not drink out of the water fountain. And there are bathrooms also down the hall. So I'd like to introduce the mayor of Missoula, and we're so pleased that he could be here today. It's really wonderful for him to come and welcome you all. So welcome, Mayor.
Thank you, Farley, and good morning. So typically my remarks involve directing people to the bathroom, so things will be considerably foreshortened this morning. I do have a 90-slide PowerPoint. We'll make that available to each of you using old growth paper later. So I have to jest a little bit, especially this time in the morning. Pleasure to see you all here this morning to participate in this workshop. So I grew up about 2 blocks away from what we're calling the old mill site, and some of your travels will take you there today. And I tell people that's the first place as a kid I learned to drink Sterno. It was an industrial part of our city, and as that industry dwindled, decay began to set in. And so as we talk about brownfields and economic development, the larger piece of that for somebody who serves as mayor or somebody who serves as a neighbor to one of those sites, somebody who serves as a developer, or someone who's in the business of serving as, we say, our partners in rehabilitating these places, they're about building community. So this workshop is about building community, and in many cases rebuilding community on sites where it disappeared for a time. And I'm not sure that there's much better work that you can do than build community. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being interested in building community. If you need further directions to any site around the city, please feel free to come to my office, and I can guide you to an occasional drinking establishment if water from the fountain isn't your beverage. So we'll have that as an option for you too. I'll try to be in and out a little bit today. Look forward to meeting some of you. If someone would like to claim the prize for being from furthest away, I heard Portland, Maine. I don't know if we have any other choices today, but we have a series of substantial cash prizes available at City Hall as well for that, so you're welcome to apply. You'll hear today from one of our partners at the state, Richard Opper, and again, this is all about putting these pieces together. Brownfields, as you know, are complex, but unless we engage in some patience and keep our eye on the prize, it's easy to lose sight of where we're heading. So that's an important message here today, and I think you'll hear that as a recurring theme. So with that, hope we can all keep our eyes on the prize and have a fantastic day here in Missoula.
So I am going to work very hard to keep us on time or early, which is a feat, I think. We're going to work hard, but we are early right now. So if we'd like to move directly into our first panel, which is a Brownfields Nuts and Bolts panel, then we're going to do that. So I welcome all the panelists to come forward, and we will get started. So these mics, we're being filmed, obviously, so if you want to talk into the mics, that would be great. And your presentations are on the computer. Okay.
Best it's going to get. Good morning. Great projector they got there. Looks like they burned out a bulb.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's all red.
How do I make this, oh, here we go.
Okay, there's a little green light that comes on to turn on right there.
Okay.
All righty. Thank you. Okay. Good morning. In the interest of keeping us ahead of schedule, I'll get started. And you see a PowerPoint come up, which people cringe sometimes when they see those because you have to sit through so many, Mr. Mayor. But this is actually a pretty short. And first of all, my name is David Lloyd. I'm the director of the EPA Brownfields program in Washington, D.C. Mayor, thank you very much for having us. This is wonderful. I've never been to your city, but it's beautiful. I came in yesterday and had time to run around and hike up to the M, which was a lot steeper than it looked from far away. And I was thinking, oh, I'm going to run and walk. No, I didn't do that. I would have tumbled down the hill. But it was beautiful. And I have some general just sort of statistics and information about our program. But I wanted to start just by saying, I have been able to travel around a lot. Particularly right now, we're really busy visiting a lot of sites. There's a lot of great success stories going on. I just came from Region 1, from Maine, at a mill redevelopment project that was just phenomenal. And I'm sure it's going to be just as good, your project. It's phenomenal, and it really proves that you can improve the environmental health of a community and at the same time improve the economic health, and they go hand in hand. I grew up and was born and raised in Nevada, so and I get out here as often as I can to the west. There's a misconception that brownfields don't exist in pristine, beautiful areas like this, and we know that's not the case. Brownfields exist wherever people have been engaged in economic activity, really. I just came from a site in Reno. I grew up in Carson City, Nevada, but I was in Reno for fantastic project. An Indian tribe has cleaned up a major site, a 20-acre site, petroleum cleanup, and done a great job with it. And it really, again, emphasized to me the wonderful aspects of this program, the partnership between the state, the community with a vision, and in this case, an Indian tribe. Let me get started here. Page down. You're going to hear more detail from some folks, Ted Lanzano and Johanna Miller are here from Region 8, about the specifics of our grants and the types of grants, and we'll be able to answer questions. But generally, the program, if you're not familiar with it, it was statutorily created by Congress in 2001. It existed in some sort of pilot forms before that. The Superfund statute was amended, and now Brownfields can stand on its own, the program. We have authority and money to provide grants and technical assistance to support this type of project. We have grants to support the development and enhancement of state and tribal programs, which is a critically important part of our program. And there also in the statute are some enforcement discretion tools and liability protections, which I think particularly initially was the most important aspect of the program because, and it's still the case, people won't go near brownfields if they're afraid they're going to end up getting drug into major environmental compliance issues with the state or the government. I always put up our accomplishment slide, not because we want to brag about the program, because EPA actually has a small part in the success that's shown in this slide, but because it does underscore that working with communities and the state and tribal programs, this is the kind of numbers we get. Since the program began, we have leveraged over $12.6 billion in cleanup and redevelopment. And that isn't a loose number, that isn't a one we make up, that is reported numbers from our grantees, and it changes every month. It kicks up, and it's impressive. As you see there, more than 49,000 jobs. It's actually right around 50,000 jobs. And those numbers are a little bit modest on that jobs leverage because that's just what gets reported. And there's always more jobs created than we actually get reported to us. We've been able to support the assessment of more than 12,500 properties, and this is important, and Ted and Johanna will go through this more because, just assessing a property, in many cases, we'll learn what the contaminant is, the community will learn, and it'll free that up. They'll be able to say, great, we can move forward. We don't have to do a big cleanup. A lot of properties are not contaminated to the level that, will stop development. And then when it says here the cleanup of 240 properties, I debate whether I even want to put that in because it doesn't sound like much, but it is. That's direct cleanups from those dollars. A lot more cleanup activity takes place, and the last bullet on this slide shows it, that with the funding we're able to give to our state and tribal partners, they report that just in the last 2 years, almost 19,000 sites have gone through those programs, and well over 250,000 acres cleaned. And those numbers, again, go up each time. So this, to me, is the most exciting aspect of the program. The fact that the state response programs, the tribal response programs are strengthening and growing, and they truly are helping communities. I think it's funny, there's a little bit of a tension sometimes when you talk to governments and you talk about how the money should be allocated between local governments and the state government, and it's understandable, and I think Mike's going to talk a little bit about that. But with the response programs developing the way they are, I see it all the time that what a valuable tool they are, the state and tribal programs to communities. Quickly, our Brownfield grants, I won't talk about 07, but in 08 we received a record number of proposals, applications, 845. That's very competitive. We made our selections, and these are the numbers of grants that will be awarded and in the process of being awarded right now. I've talked about the state and tribal program, so I won't go through the details of this slide, but I just want to emphasize that, when we talk about the acres cleaned, that isn't just cleaned That's cleaned, that's institutional, environmental, engineering and institutional controls in place where required. You know, to us, a very impressive number. We report it and we highlight it particularly because that gets attention with the Office of Management and Budget and the Hill. And they like to see that. And that is what we have to keep doing to keep this funding coming, to keep this program sort of intact. We're under a lot of pressure, as you are, I'm sure here in your community, Mayor, and the state. All of us are under tremendous budget pressures. We've been lucky in the Brownfields program that our funding has stayed steady at around 160 or 70 million a year. And Charlie will touch on that, I'm sure. But I think the reason is because communities can talk about the success and what it's meaning to their bottom line and their economy. In Montana, we've had, really the program's grown a lot, and the state is a big part of that. As you can see through this year, 17 assessment revolving loan fund and cleanup grants, that's what ARC is, have been awarded, totaling almost $5 million. The dollars leverage number is increasing. We had a nice grant, 2 assessment grants go to the Big Sky Economic Development Authority in Billings this year. And I put that bullet in because they tried a number of times. They applied, they went through the very kind of painful process and really time-consuming process of applying for grants several times before they were successful. But they didn't give up, and I'm so glad they didn't. And I talked to them a few times and said, put it in again, talk to the region, find out where you maybe could improve your grant application, and they did that. And so I was thrilled that they got these 2 assessment grants this year. And also, Montana's been a big player with our job training grants, and you see that. And these grants are really great. They really do help train local folks in brownfield communities that have a brownfield grant, in really what I would call a sustainable job skills in the environmental area. And the state and tribal funding, I think I've talked about enough. We made major revisions to our grant guidelines this year. And the important thing to note about this, first of all, I put the website here, go there, and there's detailed explanation of the changes. So those our guidelines are out now for the next round. I think what's great about it is we've put more flexibility in the grants. We've also allowed for this creation of what we call assessment coalitions. And what that would do, it's sort of similar to our revolving loan fund program. What we're hoping it will do is allow communities who maybe don't have as much capacity to apply for and manage a grant to maybe join with their state programs and apply for an assessment coalition, get $1 million, and spread that assessment money around. This is the first year we're trying it, so I hope it's successful. And also, we've tried to make the guidelines a little easier. Grant programs, particularly federal grant programs, I mean, they're a pain to administer. You have a lot of rules you have to impose on folks, and so I get those complaints constantly, and we're always open to suggestions on how we can improve it. I'm going to quickly run through this. We've got some priorities that we're working on in the program this year, and we've put a lot of money, shifted money into some of these areas. And sustainable revitalization is a huge topic, but I think it's one that's important. And my philosophy, or our philosophy in the program, is that, taking a project and reusing it in a sustainable way, making sure that it's developed in a way that is protective of the environment, make sure that cleanup on that site is protective long term. It doesn't mean that you can't use that site for manufacturing industry, because that's what communities need. The region sometimes. The Region 1 site I visited had it was an old paper mill, a huge paper mill, very contaminated. The ownership basically in the 70s, one day, closed up and left. So the community was stuck with this site. It's been cleaned, and now it's being used to essentially build modular oil refineries. They build these components, they put them on a barge and ship them down to Port Arthur, and it will be the largest oil refinery in the country, one of the largest in the world. I say that because, people a lot of times when I talk to communities and in our conference think, well, brownfields it's going to be a upscale housing, it's going to be retail, it's going to be restaurants. Well, it is sometimes. Sometimes it's going to be a big box store because that's what the community needs. But in this case, up there, it's going to be manufacturing. So I'm excited about that, and it's important. My point being that the sustainable redevelopment of any of those sites is what we're trying to move toward. I won't go through all of these, but these are some of the items that we also put money into and work on. Land revitalization broadly across all our cleanup programs. We do help make sure that, Superfund sites, tank sites, RCRA sites are also getting support for these areas. These are some of the other things we've worked on. We really, the top one I'll just mention briefly, the outreach to lenders is something that has been very successful. Charlie helped us a lot on this. Particularly with smaller banks and mid-sized banks, we still found that there was a lot of anxiety about going and loaning money for cleanup of a contaminated site or development of a contaminated site. They just didn't want to bother with it. They have enough to worry about. But we did a series around the country of sessions that I think will help, I hope will help, to try to assuage concerns. We brought FDIC in with us, we brought SBA with us, and explained that the statute is set up in a way that with some certain approaches to the cleanup and the assessment of a site, you can avoid liability and not be concerned about that. And lastly, as I say, we'll have the next grant award will be in the spring. In addition to the grants, though, I really encourage you to please go, look at our website. There's a lot of information on there that is related to the grants and related to redevelopment, but that is also useful and helpful. And lastly, I just want to say, I've already talked about the role that the states play, but, Region 8 is one of our leading regions in terms of brownfield redevelopment. They're on the forefront of a lot of really exciting things right now, most, I think, notably, looking at mine-scarred lands and looking at issues like creating renewable energy sources on mine-scarred lands. So I commend Region 8 for the way they've stepped forward to help us in some of these areas. And I just encourage you, particularly from other states who are here, use your EPA region to help you. If you know of a site and you don't know how to approach it, don't be afraid to ask, because particularly when you're dealing with the Brownfields program, it's not the enforcement program. They want to help you, and they want to help you work through those problems, and they do it all the time. So I'm so thankful that the region invited me to come talk with you. And I wish I could stay longer. I'm glad I got to see this community yesterday, but I've got to head back this morning. I've been traveling a lot I've got some irritated people back in my office wanting me to finish things and get the stack reduced. But thank you for having me, and good luck today with your workshop and this evening with your site tour. Let me trade places with Charlie.
My Brownfield challenge is going to be doing this without putting my eye out, I think.
One more click.
All right.
Oh, sorry, I didn't close it. Maybe if you just close it up here, Charlie.
Oh, boy.
Can you just close it up here?
Is that one, that one's yours there? Which one's you?
I can't even, my eyes are so bad I can't see.
Is that one you?
What's it called, partnerships?
No, it's just called Montana.
Mine's called Montana. So
Oh, here I am, right there.
That one?
Yeah. All right, thank you, and good morning. My name is Charlie Barch. I'm with ICF International, but I've been doing brownfield work for more than 15 years. I've done workshops in about 40 states, and I've been to more than 200 communities talking about the brownfield issues. I've really come to believe over that time that one of the first steps in dealing with the brownfield issue is knowing about it, and I think one of the goals of this workshop is to demystify the process of that. My goal and ICF's goal through all this is to really work with communities on revitalization and community betterment strategies. As I go through today, I've got a lot of examples, and I'm going to go through them quickly. There's some handouts, and I know that NALGIP is going to post these on the website, and I appreciate the mayor going quickly so that I bought a little extra time here this morning. What I want to talk about are some of the common brownfield challenges out there, some of the financing gaps, and why public sector support is needed. And I really want to provide an introduction and some information on some of the commonly used tools to help support brownfield revitalization, the kinds of things that you need to know about if you really want to put that puzzle together. Development practitioners and local officials typically face two types of brownfield redevelopment challenges. First, there's a number of process challenges. You need to identify contamination. Oops, and I went too far here. We needed a dress rehearsal. I can see the filming. You need to identify the contamination. You need to know what you're dealing with, you know, what's there, how much of it, and how much time and money it may take to clean it up. You really want to eliminate the surprises and pinpoint the specifics. And then once you know what's there, you need to address it. And what we're seeing in communities around the country is a real key piece of this is figuring out the end user and the end use, because this helps you determine how clean is clean for that site, which determines the cleanup strategy, which may, in the end, reduce costs as you do this, if you're able to use things like institutional or land use controls. And you need to define the cleanup plan so you know when you've reached that final point in cleanup, and also work through your state voluntary response program. This is really key because of the liability relief that that state approval can convey. And you need to deal with some of the contamination-driven concerns. I mean, there may be marketing issues related to redevelopment of a brownfield site. There may be some stigma issues you need to overcome, especially those related to community concerns about what was there and what's going to be there, perceptions of residual risk. And I think in places, in more rural states like Montana, you face an additional challenge. You know, unlike large landlocked cities that have been built out, and when brownfield reuse is a real driver for any kind of development, in small towns and rural areas, you've got location challenges. I mean, you know, you just kind of go right next door or down the block or across the next field, and you've got a green, clean site to work with. So when you want to stimulate reuse, you have to deal with some of those locational issues as well. And second are the brownfield redevelopment funding challenges. I mean, it really takes green up front if you want to deal with the brown. You need money for site assessment, for cleanup, for some of the underwriting needs that lenders will require as they pursue these loans. You need to focus on who is going to put the institutional controls in place, how they're going to be maintained over time, who's going to pay for that. You need to identify, you know, the validity of environmental insurance and figure out the costs of that. So really finding redevelopment financing for brownfields often boils down to figuring out how you're going to level the financial playing field between greenfield and brownfield redevelopment to address some of these real or perceived environmental risks. And this often involves setting the stage to invite private investment into these projects. We know that the public sector, and I think David reiterated this point very well, we know that the public sector can jumpstart the process, they can participate in the process, but no community can see significant brownfield redevelopment take place by itself. You know, the public sector can't do this alone. So the private sector has to grapple with a number of its own brownfield redevelopment issues and concerns, and you're going to hear about some of these in more detail in the next session. But everyone working with brownfield situations need to be aware of these, especially in the current credit climate. You know, lenders may be concerned about the reduced value of the collateral linked to environmental factors. I mean, there may be some stigma issues. You may have to persuade them how your marketing is going to work. A lot of lenders in the back of their mind are concerned about if a borrower is out there, he's got to do cleanup, is he going to be able to pay off the bank's note and pay for the cleanup and the necessary site prep, you know, all at the same time. They're really going to be looking at some of these cash flow issues. Every lender will think about, okay, what happens if I have to foreclose? How does this cleanup get done and what happens? And a lot of lenders still are unaware of how the VCP process works. They're unaware of how the technologies work. They're unaware of how risk-based corrective action can work and the cost savings that it can bring. So there may be a number of issues that you will need to work with the private sector on to make your brownfields work. And really what this all comes down to is this sort of red zone. I mean, the stuff in the red boxes is really your brownfield-specific needs. These are the kinds of things that you need to address. These are the kinds of things that often require resources up front, and these are the kinds of things that really show us why some of the incentives are needed. And a real key piece of this, is, and you're going to hear about this all during the day, is that brownfield reuse is all about partnerships. There is no single best approach. You need to figure out what approach works best for you in your own situation. And depending on the site and who owns it and what its new use is intended to be, the potential partners may vary along the way. They may be public sector, a range of federal, state, local governments. In a lot of places, some of the quasi-public sector partners are playing a big role. Development authorities, housing authorities. In more and more places, nonprofits are playing a key role. Community development corporations, universities, cultural and social institutions. I mean, in some areas, churches have played a real pivotal role in moving the brownfield process along. And of course, the private sector, the whole range of transaction support partners out there. And in states all across the country, in cities and towns of all size, we're seeing how a variety of public sector tools have been used to meet those red box concerns. I mean, obviously, everybody loves the grants, but there's a lot of other things that these programs that programs can offer to do things like reduce lenders' risk. Loan guarantees, for example, or companion loans can do that. There may be a way to reduce the borrower's upfront costs so that they can deal more easily with some of those assessment, cleanup, and other upfront costs. I mean, there may be ways to work, through programs to provide interest rate reductions or subsidies or actual help with the due diligence. There's also ways to improve the borrower's financial situations, things like repayment grace periods, tax abatements, which have been a standard local tool for years and years all over, are really becoming more prominent in the brownfield financing package. And technical assistance help of all kinds can really be helpful because of the cash offsets they provide. And we're also seeing that last point up there, providing comfort to lenders or investors. Well, a lot of new efforts really involve sort of bringing the comfort to the lender. There's been situations where universities, technical assistance centers, and entities like this have worked with lenders to explain to them how the new technologies work, how they really can be done more cheaply, how they can deliver. So some of these kinds of things can really be brought to bear in your brownfields packaging. No less a brownfield authority than Pink Floyd himself really captured the reality of leveraging in a brownfield context. It really is all about making the fit. There's a lot of programs out there, and you can creatively tap into them to meet your whole range of site redevelopment needs and help you attract the private sector financing for assessment and cleanup and everything else you need to do. The trick is doing that while you fit the program eligibility criteria of the original program, and also put together a proposal that allows you to compete successfully for those resources. Only 3 federal programs have a specific brownfields mission, but in fact, more than 24 have been used somehow, somewhere, to deal with brownfield issues. It really is all about making the fit. And don't worry, Farley, I'm not going to go through all these in detail. What I do want to do, just say in general, these programs have been used to support brownfield redevelopment in many different ways, through the planning process, through helping to acquire sites, through providing resources for site assessment, through clearance and demolition, structural rehabilitation, removal of contamination. And that last bullet is a really important one in the larger context of marketing and redevelopment. A lot of these programs can be packaged in to deal with infrastructure, amenities, training, other needs that really do improve the brownfield site value. And again, most of these programs are carried out in partnership with the private sector, or they're used to jumpstart additional private sector participation. And we've heard about EPA, and we'll get more detail about some of the EPA programs. So I just want to mention briefly these programs, just to give you some sense as to how this fit can work. I think probably people here are familiar with HUD's Community Development Block Grant. Entitlement grants go to cities over 50,000. So obviously here in Montana, a real key piece of this is the small cities portion, where HUD provides funding to the states to redistribute to small cities for the HUD block grant purposes. This is in the block grant program activities are locally determined. It can include coping with contamination as part of larger redevelopment activities, and it can be lent to private companies under some circumstances. And in fact, in Montana, their state CDBG program for small cities is very similar to most other states. There's no brownfield-specific category in the Montana program, but there are several categories that they do fund that may have clear relevance and certainly could be applied in brownfield situation. And you can see the 4 categories of Montana funding up there. Economic development for creation, expansion, or retention. They can provide loans and related public improvements. They provide grants for housing and neighborhood renewal, and things like it can include cleaning up debris and enhancing community amenities. For public facilities, the basic infrastructure. In Montana, specifies things like nursing homes, senior citizen centers, mental health centers, daycare centers. These are the kinds of facilities that many communities have successfully placed on small brownfield sites. And again, it may be an option here. And for planning. And this year, Montana got a hair under $7 million for the state CDBG program. As you can see, you can get $15,000 for planning and $450,000 for projects in these other categories, which is actually about twice as much as they can get through EPA. So there may be some possibilities to make some fits here. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I'm going to focus on non-Montana examples because we're going to get those throughout the day, and I thought you might be interested in seeing how other communities, small and mid-sized, have dealt with this. In Rochester, New York, CDBG was used to pay for site assessment and part of the first phase cleanup at an abandoned car lot service station, and it's been converted into housing, and the old showroom was converted into this kind of funky coffee shop. A whole new neighborhood in a pretty defunct part of Rochester. This is the trick slide, bear with me. This is why you don't use interns. They get too jazzy for me. I guess I was supposed to pause for dramatic effect, each one of those. But this is a small town of Old Town, Maine. It was an old paper plate manufacturing facility right on the Penobscot River. It's been converted into a park with commercial buildings. And in this case, the state, through the CDBG program, provided a grant for infrastructure around the commercial buildings. Again, very similar approach to what you have here in Montana. And it's also interesting, too, to say that you let no potential resource go untouched. They also, because they were doing walkways, they got money from the Trails program, and they also got money to plant the trees. So some very interesting leveraging, especially when you're talking about a very small town. 30 jobs is quite an achievement. EDA, the Economic Development Administration, nearly 2/3 of EDA's funding goes to small towns and rural areas. I can tell you that yesterday they named the new headquarters Brownfield coordinator at EDA. His name is Ken Kukovic. He's known brownfields for years. He's very enthusiastic, and I'm hopeful he's going to be a very good partner in this effort. And EDA has provided resources for a number of brownfield projects over the years. Again, they don't have a brownfields program, but they have a program to provide public works grants to finance industrial development. They've done a lot of industrial site renovation and rehab, classic brownfield type stuff. They also have a program, their economic dislocation program, which provides resources to capitalize revolving loan funds in distressed areas. And Kenosha, Wisconsin, and a couple of communities have actually made downtown brownfield abandoned sites the focus of some of these RLFs. And they also support, EDA also supports rural planning through economic development districts. Just a quick example. This is an old mill in Lewiston, Maine, shut down a long time ago. It's being redeveloped in stages as a small business incubator. EDA put in about $1 million into this one to support some of the cleanup and initial infrastructure upgrades. And this is gradually evolving. And today there's more than 1,000 people working in various small businesses in this mill. Again, a good example of how the EDA resources can work. Every state gets money through DOT for transportation, and transportation programs can be linked to brownfields. Headquarters DOT policy, in fact, encourages this, although if you're going to use DOT money, you must work through your state MPOs and your local transportation agencies, so your local challenge is to really kind of educate them about how their programs can be applied in ways that support what you want to do. But But we've seen from examples around the country, and a growing number of examples, that the transportation money can help upgrade some of the existing transportation facilities. This can be a way to level that playing field between the greenfield and the brownfield. It allows you to offer transportation amenities that improve access to and marketability of sites. And I think what we're seeing in more and more places is people are figuring out, as institutional controls, as risk-based corrective actions are being integrated into the brownfield strategy, that in fact, you know, the roads and the road money can be used as part of the pollution solution. When you use roadways as institutional caps or institutional controls, there may be ways to pull in the transportation money. And one of the places they did this was in Moline, Illinois. It was a huge former industrial warehousing area right on the Mississippi River, and this area has been cleared and it's being converted to residential and commercial uses. And the DOT money was used to install the street grid. Some of those roads are being used as institutional controls, and it really opened up the area and enhanced the marketability of the new activities and going into the site. So an interesting way of doing this. And I really want to take a minute to focus on USDA, you know, given, you know, the rural nature of Vermont. Again, is anybody here from USDA? You know, USDA, this is actually, I mean, if you ever had an example of where you got to make the fit, you know, you can go to USDA and you say, I've got this great brownfield redevelopment project, and they will look at you like you've just stepped off the planet Mars. But in fact, you can really very creatively work to make this fit. USDA rural development funds must meet broadly defined program objectives, you know, like the HUD stuff, and there's 4 key USDA programs that can do this within a brownfield context: the community facilities loans and grants programs that can support, you know, redevelopment activities that include industrial park sites or access. The business and industry loans, the B&I loans are available to improve, and this is right from their mission, the economic and environmental climate in rural communities. So I may have had too much of that coffee this morning, but to me, it really does sound like a program that directly complements the brownfield goals. And they have an intermediary relending program that provides money to communities to relend, and rural development grants for a variety of purposes. Again, you know, key elements of a brownfield strategy. And they can be used for the same types of activities: planning, site clearance and prep, rehab and improvement, and construction of real estate improvements. And I'm trying to be mindful of the time here. But I want to give you a couple of quick examples. An old steel mill in Greenfield, New Hampshire, that used a USDA community facilities loan to convert the site into a needed community septic system and a park. This is a housing example in Seaford, Delaware, an old sewing machine factory. Again, you know, they took this and they converted it into housing with a USDA rural development loan, which actually attracted some private bank participation. They were concerned about stigma. They opened it in mid-January. It was fully leased by March. This is a small business incubator in Walt Hill, Nebraska. This is a classic case. They said, no, we don't have a brownfield, and we're all over here like, okay, it is an old electric facility. It's an old former electric power plant. It's sat empty for 20 years. They pulled together a number of resources and converted this into a downtown small business incubator. Price's Supermarket in Blue Hill, Nebraska was destroyed by fire. USDA economic development loan along with CDBG helped the reconstruction and allowed that store to reopen. And I also want to turn to a couple of federal tax incentives that can be linked to brownfield redevelopment or at little or no cost to the community or the project. I mean, tax incentives are taking on a new prominence in these tight budget times. And again, it's important to think beyond brownfields to make the fit when you're pursuing your brownfield objectives. And I want to just focus on these 3. But just some advantages of using the tax incentives, they can increase the project's internal rate of return. They can help the cash flow piece of this by freeing up cash that you would ordinarily need to use for tax payments. If you have a larger project, some credits can be sold for cash or syndicated to attract additional investment up front. They certainly sometimes attract different players to the redevelopment table. But I think most important, when you're really trying to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row on financing, tax incentives are not subject to a competitive public grant process. If you meet the criteria, you get the incentives value. So that's an important factor in many decisions about how these projects get put together. First, historic rehabilitation tax credits are taken in the year the building is put into service. You get a 20% credit for work done on historic structures. But a lot of people don't realize if you just happen to have an old building, a building built before 1936, you can get a 10% credit, and there's no state certification required. Nationally, historic rehab tax credits are the most rapidly expanding tax incentive. In more and more places, they're being integrated into brownfield project financing strategies. And I'm not sure about the specifics of the state historic process in Montana, but I can tell you in a lot of states, the state historic preservation officers are getting much more attuned to what it needs to take to pull together a historic rehab project at a brownfield site. And they've become much more willing to work with developers to deal with things like lead paint removal processes and window restorations and things like that to make these projects happen, because they recognize that without the brownfield developer going in, that their buildings are likely going to just continue to deteriorate. Quickly, this is an old furniture manufacturer in downtown Grand Rapids. It's being converted to apartments. The rehab tax credits played a key role in attracting the individual equity contributions. This project was large enough that they were able to syndicate some of those credits off and get additional resources in up front that helped pay for the cleanup and the conversion to the apartments and the commercial. This is probably a more typical project for a lot of places. This is the old fire station in Northampton, Massachusetts. Again, an obsolete public facility, had contamination issues, not major, but it had them. And in this case, the historic rehab tax credits, the cash flow impact provided the reuser, the developer, with a little bit of cushion so that they could undertake the conversion into a small studio space. Low-income housing tax credits, every state gets them. They can encourage capital investment in affordable housing projects on brownfield sites, on other targeted sites. States get a population-based allocation, which they in turn distribute to communities and nonprofits who focus on housing. In the period from '87 to 2005, Montana has gotten $22 million worth of these credits, supporting more than 4,000 units. And they can be done creatively on brownfields. Here's an example from Boston that I like to put in here, because not only did they convert an old fish processing plant into affordable housing, but they also did it in a very green way. It's energy efficient, sustainably built. So some pretty interesting things that can be done with this. I want to mention the brownfield expensing tax incentive. And before everybody runs out to try to use this, I should mention that this is an incentive that has kind of gone along in fits and starts since it was enacted more than 10 years ago. It's currently, as they say, like the summer reruns, it's on hiatus. But it lapsed at the end of 2007. There has been considerable congressional interest in renewing it as part of a larger tax incentive extender package, which has passed the House. And it's waiting on Senate action. The Senate stuff has gotten hung up on issues that have nothing to do with brownfields. I think there's a good chance that it will pass, and the extender that's in there now covers the 2008 period. Since 2006, petroleum cleanups were eligible to be expensed. Basically, what you can do is you can write off in the year you incur them site assessment, cleanup, monitoring, institutional control related costs, any money you may have to pay to your VCP, anything that's involved with the brownfield project can be expensed rather than having to be capitalized over time. I don't think this incentive has ever been used in Montana. It's not gotten a lot of use nationally, but it can be actually a pretty effective piece of a package. This is an example in Westchester, Pennsylvania, an old pharmaceutical property and dump site which was cleaned and redeveloped, and it's now the home of the Goodwill Business Park. It's got a Goodwill Center. It's got some public service facilities. And I think the bottom line is that the incentive provided Alliance with nearly $800,000 in tax relief. It was an extensive cleanup, and they were able to really recover up front some of the value of that cleanup. Let me just pass through that because that shouldn't be there yet. Finally, I do want to mention that a lot of communities are making brownfield projects happen, by packaging programs, but also by creatively promoting low-cost and no-cost brownfield redevelopment strategies. There's a number of tools out there that can enhance the climate for redevelopment, and I think what's important is that they don't require, much or any additional cash outlay, but they're the kinds of things that are really worth a lot of money to the new site developer and the new site user. I just want to mention 3 of these tools and give you a couple of blast examples. I've mentioned institutional controls. These are things like deed restrictions, use limitations that may be linked to the site condition. Around the country, institutional controls are credited with making many projects work. Innovative cleanup technologies. I was the person who, I couldn't even get through freshman high school biology, so I have no idea how these things work, but I can tell you that there's new technologies emerging all the time, and they are really reducing the cost of cleanup at many, many projects significantly. So last year's dog may certainly be next year's winner in terms of the financial standpoint because of the new technologies that are out there. It's a fascinating overlay of environmental science and economic development that you really need to factor into this. And there's cost-saving technical assistance and project support. We're seeing creative, cooperative, and supportive bureaucracy really making a difference. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples that show these. This is in Sand Spring, Oklahoma. This is a case where institutional controls work. This is also a case where that Walmart could have gone to any greenfield around there, but they worked very closely with the developer to get that onto an old smelter site. The real key piece was the institutional control. That parking lot is your institutional control. And the fact that that reduced cleanup costs so much is the kind of thing that really made that project work with significant community benefit. Now we can have this one. This is an innovative technology example. This is an old airplane engine manufacturing facility in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. It sat empty for half a century near downtown Williamsport. The huge issue was groundwater contamination. It was too costly to treat by conventional means. And in this case, the local government, working in partnership with Pennsylvania's environmental agency, identified this was the first project that used the molasses injection technology to deal with chromium contamination in groundwater. And they worked very closely with the voluntary cleanup program, very closely with a number of technical providers, and that technology application is what made this project work. And so you went from the top for half a century to the bottom, where you've got a retail complex and a parking facility to support that. And in Camden, New Jersey, this is a case where, again, the creative, comforting bureaucracy really helped. This is on Camden's water. Has anybody ever been to Camden, New Jersey that's in this room? It is, as you know, a very distressed place. And the fact that they had a developer interested in coming in and putting in new market rate housing was significant. The cleanup process was a potential barrier, and New Jersey DEP provided technical assistance to the developer on institutional control strategies and really how to deal with some of the residual PCBs. And it was all of that effort that allowed cleanup and redevelopment to go forward concurrently, which led to the development of this private market rate housing. This was the first market rate housing built in Camden in 4 decades. And just to close, because I know I'm pushing it here, I just got to give you, this is just a good local story about small-town brownfield creativity. I mean, if there was ever a town that was sort of the never say never, that was their strategy. This was Rosalia, Washington, which I think I didn't even put up there. But you did. I did. Oh, okay. This shows how a locally driven public-private partnership can stimulate reuse. You are looking, the top photo is downtown Rosalia, Washington. It was pretty much, it was the abandoned Texaco station that went back to the 1920s. There was a lot of interest in figuring out how to revive downtown Rosalia. Not a lot of staff support, as you would imagine, in a town of 600 people in rural Washington. They decided, because they were in an area that was near Steptoe National Battlefield and some National Forest areas, that they wanted to become sort of a gateway visitor center area. They didn't have any money. They didn't know what, so what they did is the mayor of the town, who is this elderly gentleman and his wife, so this was sort of like, Grandma and Grandpa do brownfields, they just decided that they were going to take this on, and they went and they talked and cajoled and bullied and badgered. The only public money that went into this was an $80,000 grant from the state of Washington to do the tank pull. Everything else was donated pro bono. They got law firms to donate legal services, they talked the utilities into providing some incentives rates. There was concern that if they developed this into this little retail center and visitor center, they had no money to pay for staffing, so what they did is they allowed some of the commercial folks, which were really just local craftspeople that came in and took little stall space inside the gas station. You know, in exchange for giving them reduced rent, they also manned the visitor center, they structured hours, all sorts of things. There was a group in town, the Gifted Grannies, that knitted quilts, which they sold to raise money for sheetrock. They contacted the Retired Texaco Executives Association, which I don't even know where that was, and talked them into donating old Texaco memorabilia, which is decorating the place. But to me, the really cool thing, this is for all the mammoth large cities and everything else, this town of 600 forged the first ever working brownfield partnership with a state Department of Corrections. Grandma and Grandpa went to the state prison warden, which was about 60 miles away, and convinced him to have the inmates make commemorative license plates for this gas station, which they sold, and you can still buy them online now, to raise money to, again, deal with supplies and things, you know, just filling in the cracks on this. This was a Phoenix Award, an EPA Phoenix Award winner in 2005. It is the smallest town ever to win a Phoenix Award, and it was because they just never said never. They made the fit all along the way. If you'd like any further information, we've got a website too, and there's some information, a little bit of information in the room. And with that, I'm going to stop because I think I've gone on too long. So thank you very much.
Well, good morning. Thank you all for having me here, Mayor. I guess the mayor ran out on us, but what a great facility, what a great day, beautiful Montana day. I'm glad to be here. I hope my voice holds out. As of yesterday, it was a little iffy whether I'd even make it today. I'm kind of fighting this cold, so we'll see how it goes. There's always some advantages and disadvantages of being the first panel of the morning, and one of them is there is some technical problems. You can see we've got a little bit of a rose color. And I don't want this to be some sort of subliminal message that looking at environmental problems through Brownfield's glasses is like looking at them through rose-colored glasses. But we've got the screens up here, and all of my slides are going to be hung on the NALGEF website. I went paperless as recommended, so there's a lot of detail in these slides, and I'll go through them pretty quick like our other speakers. But they'll all be available on the website, and there's some links in there like there just was in Charlie's, so hopefully those links will survive. If not, at least they're in there and you can type them back in. There's a lot of information on websites, and that's really important on the Montana website, as you'll see in a minute. The name of my talk, they wanted me to talk about nuts and bolts, and I started talking to some of our Brownfields folks in the department on what do I really need to impart as a message from the talk this morning, and they said partnerships. You know, building partnerships is really important. And I know that may sound counterintuitive, seeing as you're being spoken to by someone from DEQ. We're not known in a lot of places when it comes to cleaning up the environment as a partner. But I really want to say today that we are. I always like to start off with our mission statement, and my director's here to make sure I got it right, and that really is to protect, sustain, and improve a clean and healthful environment to benefit present and future generations. Now, you may have seen that before. It's very similar to Article 9 out of our state constitution, and we take that under the leadership of Director Opper very seriously. Our mission at DEQ is to make sure that we provide a very clean and healthful environment. All right. Well, when I introduced myself, I didn't say that I'm the chief of the Hazardous Waste Site Cleanup Bureau. So I'm a regulator. I'm what many of the people out there that are not in the industry think of as the environmental police. We're the ones that come in and enforce the cleanup of sites that are contaminated. And that's an important part of the mission I just talked about, to improve and sustain a clean and healthful environment. I kind of put two colors here if they came up. Boy, you can't even read the bottom one. If you look on the side screens, you can see the top 5 programs are those cleanup authorities that are in my bureau, and then the bottom 3 are elsewhere in DEQ. And that's why I was the one that came up here to speak, because most of the cleanup programs are in my bureau, and likewise most of the brownfields projects are also in my bureau, our bureau. And the one that people deal with most commonly is the VCRA, the Voluntary Cleanup and Redevelopment Act. And that's our voluntary cleanup program in Montana law. And that's one that has quite a few bells and whistles and quite a few requirements. And we're constantly, it's not that new and it's not that old a program, but we're continually evolving it and developing it and coming up with improvements. And as we get more into the brownfields, we can see different areas that need improvement, and we're suggesting some improvements in this upcoming legislature to make it a little more user-friendly and get sites cleaned up. This is a good point to talk about partnerships. Now, we think of partnerships most commonly in the business community, where you get people that come together, and why do they come together? They come together because they have a common goal. And DEQ wants to partner with folks that want to partner with us for the common goal. And of course, you come into a partnership, each partner has their own needs, and they have their own benefits that they can bring to the table to help out the other partners. And sometimes you have happy partnerships, and sometimes you have partnerships that are a little more tense, but you always try to get to the same goal. And our need on DEQ, it goes back to our mission. We need to clean up the environment. And we as regulators have to go by these various cleanup laws that are on the Montana books, and sometimes those are kind of bumpy to get through. The brownfields folks can bring a lot of things to the table, a lot of community involvement, money to get some sites cleaned up that otherwise wouldn't be cleaned up, and those definitely lead into what we need when we get sites cleaned up. I do want to mention that from our experience in the last couple of years since we've had a brownfields program, we have found that brownfield projects really succeed when they're from the bottom up. It's not the state of Montana coming down and saying, this is a great brownfield site, let's get it cleaned up. It's the community coming to us saying, we've got a great brownfields project, what can we work with you to get this site cleaned up and redeveloped? And that's really important. We've actually tried cleaning up some sites on our own, and sometimes we've been successful, but the message to bring home is it's very, very difficult unless the community. Sometimes all you need is that one person or the couple that was talked about in Charlie's presentation, where they really wanted to get that gas station redeveloped. I mean, sometimes you just need one person in the community that's going to take this on as their battle. And we've got some people here in this room that have made some cases in Montana very successful. I know Dwayne Ferdinand is here, and he's speaking this afternoon, and there's many others out there I know. DEQ, we look at ourselves as an enabler or a catalyst. And the things that we can bring to the table are information sources, assistance in many ways I'll talk about, and then we can do some specific site work. Let me just talk about that. We are given money from the EPA in our Brownfields grants to provide certain things to the public. And one of those is our public record or information sources. And we do things like, if you go to our website, and that's the link on the very bottom, and I hope when these are translated onto the website that this link survives so you can just click on it. Otherwise, just type it in. Go to montana.gov and you can get down to our brownfield site very quickly. There's a good search engine if you want to go there today. But we've got a lot of information out there on brownfields, a lot of information on our cleanup programs, and those sites that are contaminated. Now, as you've probably read in the paper, we've got a lot of contaminated sites out there that we just don't have the resources to get to right away because they're lower priority, lower risk sites. And those are the ones that are perfect candidates for brownfields. And those are probably in your communities here. I'm not sure how many communities we have represented in this room, but I can guarantee you, I bet there's some of our sites that we know about in each community. And bigger than that, there's other sites that we don't know about that may not be on our response list, for instance, that you know about. And as you'll see some of the case examples I'll show in a minute, those are very important to the communities. A lot of them are eyesores. A lot of them are just, hindering, the image of a small community. They're right on the entrance to a town, and it just looks bad. So there's a lot of opportunities that we don't even know about. But we've got a lot of information on our website, and a lot of this has been facilitated by the funding we've gotten from the EPA to really put information out there. We've got an interactive mapping site that's very good. It's amazing what capabilities are in an interactive mapping site that you can do. It's run by the State Library. I think it's still run by the State Library. Natural Resource Information System, and you can search by just about all of our contaminated sites, or at least many of them, underground storage tanks, leaking underground storage tanks, abandoned mines, hazardous waste sites, and you can do it by area search, you can do it by county, you can do it in many different ways just to find out what you have in your community. So it's worth going to our website just to find out what we've got in your community as far as sites that we know about. And as I said, many of the brownfields that have been brought to us and developed are sites that aren't even on our lists. Outreach. We do a lot of outreach. Well, right here today, for instance, this is some of our outreach. We do little meetings. If people want us to come and talk about brownfields, all you have to do is ask. We've got resources. We've got experts. Many people that know more about brownfields than I do in our program. We can come and talk to you about resources. We know other people and other programs that we can bring to meetings. We have a newsletter we send out. Is it quarterly or semi-annually? Semi-annually, isn't it? Yes, twice a year. And we do a lot of information requests. If people have questions about a site, about an area, a lot of times they'll email us, they'll call us, they'll write us letters, and we'll answer those questions best we know about what we know about contamination in a site or what we can help them with our laws and regulations. Oh, and listserv. I got to mention listserv. We've got, this is run by Betsy Hovda here as one of our Brownfields staff members. It's an email service, whereas if you can sign up for it, and all you have to do is go to our website, and it's right there. It's an easy link, and you enter yourself, and then you'll start getting emails from us whenever we find about things that are very interesting about brownfields, about different training opportunities, about different conferences and those sorts of things. Betsy hangs those out there, and it'll send an email to you. And if you get too much email, I know we all do, and you want to be taken off, you just go right back to the website and take yourself off. It's very easy. It's very user-friendly. So that's something you should know about. We also do a lot of assistance, and we've got a couple folks on staff. Betsy's one of them, and we've got Laura Hovda, who isn't here today. Laura Alvey, who isn't here today. And we do things like we'll review your grant applications. If you're sending a competitive grant application into the EPA, we'll review that for you if you want us to. You don't have to, but we'll certainly will review it. We provide information and feedback on both threshold and ranking criteria for specific sites, whether we think a site meets the different criteria to become a brownfields and be eligible for funding. We provide letters of acknowledgement, which actually are required for a lot of the competitive grants that you put forward. Or once you get a grant and you come up with a site, you still have to go to the EPA for approval to spend your grant money on each site, and you'll need letters of acknowledgement from us. And we assist with contracting in some cases. For instance, if you get grant money to clean up a site, and for whatever reason you have difficulties with whatever your city or county or corporation laws are, trying to hire a contractor, in some cases you can give us the money and we can pass it through to the contractor that way. Site-specific activities. This is really what I want to talk about, to let you know some of the things that we've done in the state. And what we can do is we've done inventories where we've gone into communities, and we've done this mostly with the petroleum brownfields, as was talked about earlier. Well, we'll take either a community or a piece of a community, like we did part of Billings, for instance. We've done Broadus. We've done Lewistown's a great one, where we've gone in and we've hired one of our contractors to look for all the potential brownfields sites in that. And then you've got an inventory, and we give it to the development corporation or to the city or to the county or those folks that are interested and stakeholders in that community. And then they've got an idea which sites might be potential brownfields or might have potential redevelopment issues. And that helps a lot to know that information. If you do go forward with a competitive grant, you can say that you have an inventory of your community. You know, that's one of the points that counts towards scoring your grant when it is competitive with other grants. We've got money to go in and do assessments ourselves, Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental site assessments. And we don't have a lot of money for that, but we've gone in and used our money very successfully on a lot of sites. And sometimes that's all you need is a Phase 1 or a Phase 2 to get a site with potential environmental stigma just moving in a redevelopment path. We characterize sites. That's a mistake in a second. When we assess them in Phase 1, we characterize them in Phase 2, environmental assessment, EA. And we can, to a limited extent, perform cleanups. We've got some money where we can do some cleanups. An important point to note is that the site eligibility requirements for us to go in and spend our money are exactly the same as if you were putting a site-specific competitive grant forward. They're the same requirements that for other brownfield sites. And if you want to apply, if you think you have a site where we can help you, you can contact us. And right on our website, there is an application. And if we don't have enough money in our grant to help you, we work very closely with the EPA across the street, and we can get maybe some money from them. So if you have a potential site, please just give us a call, and we'd love to partner with you. I want to spend the rest of my time primarily talking about some of the sites that we've worked at in Montana to give you an idea of what has been done in this state. So hopefully those of you who are thinking about things that may or may not work in your communities will get some ideas and get the juices flowing. I don't have a lot of good before and after pictures. Most of our sites are working on are in an intermediate stage, or we just don't have some pictures. I've got a lot of befores, and that's really what I think you all need to see, to get ideas of what might be available in your community. This is the former Shelby oil refinery, and it's no longer there, but this is what it looked like back in the 70s. This is going to be annoying, I can see. The city of Shelby was very proactive in this. They actually got another grant before this from the EPA where they did some asbestos cleanup in one of their schools. And so with that momentum, they went ahead and they put in for a grant for this facility. Let me read my notes here. This old site was originally submitted for a voluntary cleanup plan to the state. And there was a lot of problems with the voluntary cleanup plan, and we made our comments, and we set it back, and it really kind of sat there. And then through the innovation or the incentive from a lot of the locals, Mayor Bonderud and Lorette Carter. Are you here, Lorette? Yeah, I hear that you had a big part in putting together the grant to get this site cleaned up. Anyway, they came together and did an assessment on this site with their money. We came in and did more assessment with our site. And the point I want to make about this is make sure you do a good assessment before you apply for cleanup funds. Are you applying for cleanup funds in your current grant year, or did you get? Yeah, they were awarded cleanup funds. And the key part to this is when they originally did the voluntary cleanup plan to the state, there was a lot of data gaps. That's why we sent it back with comments. So we were able to come in with some assessment money and do the assessment needed, so when they proposed for a cleanup grant, they had all the information they needed, and it made the grant very successful. And I think this is a good site. And I know I'm going to talk about a lot of sites in Montana, and I know there's people in the room that know more than me, so as questions come up, I'm sure that people can certainly pipe up. Kalispell Feed and Grain. Okay. The city acquired this property through back taxes. And it just kind of sat there because it did have stigma of contamination. The concerns were pretty much rumor of contamination. With any grain facility, you worry about pesticides, and you just, with any industrial facility, there's always that stigma. And sometimes it's just that stigma that needs to be gotten over through a little bit of assessment. So the city came to us, and we conducted a phase 1 environmental assessment to find out what the concerns were. And the previous sampling showed that there were pesticides in the soil. And is there anybody here from Kalispell? Knows anything about this site? Okay. Anyway, we were able to go in, and Ashley Creek is on one side of this property, and what the city wants to do is develop some of it back into an industrial park, and then they want to make some of it that's down in the floodplain that really isn't appropriate to be redeveloped to industrial park, make it a green space, make it some parks and some urban trails. And DEQ, we conducted the phase 1. We helped Flathead successfully apply for an EPA grant for the phase 2, and this project's on track. And this is one where we really did partner well. Okay. Paris Laundry is in Lewistown. And from this picture, I bet many of you can recognize sites that probably exist in your house. The city was concerned, and I know Dwayne can pipe up if I say anything wrong, I was concerned about this being a laundry. And as you know, most dry cleaning facilities have dry cleaning solvent problems. But as we went in and did the phase 1, we realized that really the only problems at this site were not involved with a dry cleaning operation, because it was a drop-off site. The dry cleaning operation took place at another facility. And this is a unique property just because it's right on the gateway where people can enter Lewistown, and it really was kind of an eyesore, and the city really wanted to get this cleaned up. So they wanted to tear down the buildings, and they wanted to add it to some parkland that's next door and make it a great gateway to Lewistown. So we came in with our DEQ grant, and we did a phase 1, and the only things we found were asbestos and a little bit of lead paint. Now, we almost always find a little bit of asbestos and lead paint in some old buildings, but that's very easy to deal with. And when you go to redevelop a property and you go to a lender, or you go to maybe get a cleanup grant to do it yourself, those are things that can be dealt with fairly commonly and fairly easily. And as you'll see, we come across that quite a bit. So based on that phase 1, and the findings, the city went ahead and purchased that, and the city is now applying for a cleanup grant. Is that right, Dwayne? And with that cleanup grant, they'll use it during the demolition to help them with the asbestos cleanup so that they can go ahead and turn this into the parkland that they want to. And as I go through, like I said, I've got more notes on here. I know they're difficult to read on the screen, but this will all be hung on the website, so hopefully it'll provide information later on. Also in Lewistown was the old nurses' school. Now, this was attached to the old hospital, which was previously converted into apartments, and the city was interested in converting this into low-income housing. Now, that brings forth a whole bunch of leveraged different funding sources to get this property redeveloped. But of course, with any property, once again, if you can get rid of the stigma of potential environmental contamination, you can move forward with that. And they got a lot of tax incentives from low-income housing, from HUD, from commerce, from historical buildings. So in order to make people come in and invest in this property and take advantage of those tax incentives, we really had to identify and quantify the environmental hazards at this. And once again, we went in and we did a phase one, and what we discovered was, once again, a little bit of asbestos and some lead paint. And so with that identified, the risk to investors has been taken care of, and the city plans to go forward and renovate this. Is that on track, Dwayne? That's close. Close. Uh-oh, it's close. Feel free to correct me. All right. Well, we're going to see a couple more examples from Lewistown, and here's one, Berg Lumber. And Berg Lumber is a piece of property that the owner went into bankruptcy, and the bankruptcy trustee only had limited money to go out and address several sites that were involved in that bankruptcy. And they're able to do a little bit of phase one investigation on this site and limited phase two, and then it kind of stalled just because of the limited funds. So we were able to go in and complete the phase two and find out exactly what the contaminants were on this property. And with all lumber mills, just like around the Missoula area and anywhere in Montana, we really worry about post and pole treating, where they use pentachlorophenol, and that's a contaminant as well as potentially dioxin. We went in and we analyzed it, and we're able to assess and find out that the limits of the contamination. And based on that, the property is worth a lot more. And I know I talked to Dwayne this morning. If the city is still interested in buying that property, that right now the trustee owns that. And of course, with any bankruptcy trustee, their first job and responsibility is to try and get the most money back for the creditors that the bankrupt party has to sell. So that property will be out on the market, and hopefully the city will get that, because they've got some real innovative ideas to turn it into some parks and river access, as well as maybe redeveloping part of it into industry. Now, Brewery Flats, this is another one in Lewistown, and I'm not going to say a whole lot about this because Dwayne's going to have this as a major part of his talk this afternoon if you go to his session. And I recommend Dwayne's session because this is a really interesting project. They submitted a voluntary cleanup plan to DEQ, and in that plan we identified some data gaps. Basically, a lot of the sampling that was previously done on this property. And what Brewery Flats is there was an old railroad roundhouse down there. There was an old oil refinery that was off to the side adjacent to it. There was a lot of potential and known contamination. Some of the previous sampling that was done on this property identified very high arsenic. And that was a real stumbling block to clean up because we had to quantify that much better. And that sampling wasn't quite done to modern day standards. So we realized if we could go back in and resample some of the soil for arsenic only, or some of the water for arsenic and other metals, only do a better job, in this case filter it, because the first samples were unfiltered, we might find that the contamination was not that big of a problem. So we went in and conducted an assessment, and we discovered that metals were primarily not a problem. There was some iron and manganese, but the arsenic, which was originally reported as very high, we found out really was not an issue at this property. So it got back on track, and it got moving forward. A point to bring forward on this is some of the struggles I think Lewistown had with getting cleanup money. Where they did get some of their cleanup money was from the state of Montana through the resource development grant, where you go into the legislature and you apply for DNRC money. And actually, they were very successful getting that money. But because the city did not own the property, they were not eligible to apply for a cleanup grant. You can apply for an assessment grant if you don't own the property, but if you want to go forward with cleanup, you have to be an owner at that point, and the city was not. But they went forward with state money, and they got the RDG grant, and I think it's on track, and I think Dwayne has some beautiful before and after pictures to show on this property. The city owns it now. The city does? The city has purchased it? Okay, great. All right. Davis Post and Pole in Willow Creek. This is 2 minutes? Okay, I'm going to go real quickly. I'll just finish talking about Davis Post and Pole. This is an interesting site because it was originally, the original owner passed away, and the property went into a trust, a family trust, and they sold off the clean portions of the property, and there was a contaminated piece in the middle. EPA came in with emergency removal, and they dug out the bulk of the contamination, but they left just a little bit. And a lot of the property that was sold around it became a community. And there's all these houses, and you can see from this picture that, or from the pictures on the wall, they pretty are surrounded by backyards, and the contamination is about the size of this room. So what we've been able to do is we've gone in, and the family trust that continues to own this one little piece of property was willing to give it, and a local Gallatin Boys and Girls Club will take it and do something with that property, but we want to make sure it's clean first. So what we've been able to do is we've gone in and we've assessed it. We've come up with site-specific cleanup values, and we're actually piloting cleanup technology using chemical oxidation, which is fairly innovative, and right now we're doing that on a bench scale project. We're in our 40th of our 60th day. It's looking very hopeful. If we get good results, then we're going to go in and do an actual pilot study. Because the project is so small, we expect the pilot study to actually clean up this property. So with Brownfield's money, we're actually going to be able to clean up this property, we hope, if everything works right as planned. And then, because of that ChemOx study, we'll be able to apply that technology to other sites across Montana and get other sites. And as you know, there's a lot of wood treating old lumber mills and post and pole plants where this technology might be helpful to clean up dioxin and pentachlorophenol. So we're really hopeful that this will be a good project, and it's just another example. With that, I think I'm out of time, and I thank you all, and I think we have a few minutes for questions. Is that correct?
Yep, we have a few minutes of questions. So does anyone have any questions for us? For our speakers? Question? Don't be shy. Yeah.
I see a lot of variability between regions, EPA, and the application of brownfield money on especially lead-based paint.
Yeah, there is some you're right, there is some variability, and we're actually working on that to try to bring more consistency. Yeah, I'm sorry. His question was that he sees, I think you're from Tetra Tech, is that right? And you see variability in how different regions deal with asbestos and lead-based paint. And there's also inconsistency in how regions deal with PCB cleanups, which are a big issue on brownfields. We are working really to try to make that more uniform. And I think what will, during the next 6 months, I think you'll see that start to happen. We're trying to develop some sort of basic primer sheets that we can issue nationally to help guide that, so communities coming in for a cleanup know what to expect. Similarly, and Ted and Johanna may talk about it later, similarly with revolving loan fund approaches and how those are, what processes communities and grant need to go through when they apply for those resources. We're trying to make that more uniform. So I think we will see an improvement there. You're right. We have some, these programs in EPA still fall under usually the Superfund division within the regions. And so there's a different mindset sometimes in different regions about how aggressive they need to be or how flexible they can be. That's not an answer to exactly, but we are working on that.
Anyone else have any questions? Yes.
Charlie, I was wondering if you could, will you explain why you think that the brownfield expensing hasn't been more widely used? Because it seems like a fairly straightforward vision.
Well, the question is, why hasn't the brownfield expensing incentive, the federal one, been more widely used? And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, well, there's a couple of reasons for that. Let me see if I can think of them. It's been authorized in fits and starts. I mean, it was first enacted in '96 for like 2 years, and then it expired, and then there was a little gap, and then it was reinstated, retroactive. So when you look at the history of it, it's been seamless. But the fit and start of this means that it's very difficult to count on it. So if you were going to do a project in 2009 and you wanted to take it into consideration, you really can't, because it's technically not in effect yet. I mean, I think there's a good chance it will be, but my thinking it's a good chance doesn't help your bottom line. So I think that one of the real reasons is that it's not been systematically or consistently in place. And I think the other reason is there's not a lot of information about it. It's administered by Treasury. Treasury does not go out and do workshops saying, hey, here's all our great federal ways to cut your taxes. It's not well known. It's a very simple process. And in fact, states that have used it a lot, like Wisconsin, process those things like in 2 weeks. It's a very simple process, but the information gap is real key on that. So I think that's really the couple of reasons why it hasn't been used. There's interest, and in fact, actually, we can't lobby, right? But I will just say that you guys here in Montana, I mean, one of the key players on this is Senator Baucus, who's chairman of the Finance Committee. And I've talked with his staff in D.C., and they're interested in this, but they're not hearing from anybody about why it should be extended. So when Congress is going through the balancing act that David alluded to earlier on, when they're trying to figure out what to fund, what to include, and what not in this larger scheme, it's a classic case of the squeaky wheel. I mean, they need to hear that it's going to matter, and it can really work. And one other thing I wanted to mention, too, is if it does pass, one of the strategies that has not been widely used, I mean, you can do such a thing as file an amended tax return, and some developers have done that to kind of pull in some resources that may not be effective on the specific project, but it gives them some resources to use for other things. So that's kind of I don't want to say wide circle answer to your question, which is a good question.
As a follow-up to that question, on that tax incentive, if you use that tax incentive in 1 year and then subsequently flip the property in the following year, do you still get to keep that incentive?
Another good question. One of the things that Congress has been interested in fixing is that issue. The tax incentive goes to the person who developed the project. So a big barrier, if you're a developer who's coming in to clean and then turn over the property to the big box, the credit value gets way diminished. And that's an issue that Congress has been trying to deal with, patterned after a lot of states that have put in transferable cleanup tax credits. So there's an interest in trying to make that happen, but that is also a big issue. The example I gave in Alliance Environmental was actually an environmental consulting firm that sort of became a developer strictly so they could get the full value of that incentive, because they realized if they flipped it, they would lose it, and they were looking at an $800,000 saving.
You mentioned the location challenge. For states like Montana that have a lot of green land, how do you encourage folks to redevelop brownfield when they have so many green areas that they could avoid it?
Well, I think one of the ways you can encourage it, really, it comes down to a couple of things. I mean, one is figuring out, actually going to really some of your examples, the fact that the blighted areas are such eyesores, and when you're trying to make a larger, attractive area, you need to deal with what's in place. And also, and thoughts running through I think it went out this ear, if I can pull it back. Another reason is that a lot of the incentives out there, historic rehab, CDBG, some of the others focus on, distressed areas and built areas, and there may be a way to kind of connect those resources to level the playing field. I mean, that's what you really need to do. You just need to show that it's not going to be more expensive at the end of the day to redevelop the brownfields than it will be to go next door. But that is a huge, huge issue in small towns because the greenfield is so close in just about every place.
Adding to that, something we're working on right now in the headquarters office is really studying and then getting that information out, studying the fact and documenting the fact that infill development, brownfields redevelopment, reusing existing infrastructure, that there is a marked reduction in vehicle miles traveled when you can locate activity in existing areas as opposed to building on a greenfield. And we have, specific areas we're studying this in, and what we're trying to do is come up with something that we can defensively show in different parts of the country that have different vehicle and transportation models, but still a 28 to 40% reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And with all the emphasis on greenhouse gas reduction and of course with the cost of fuel, we think this will help. It's sort of an education and a marketing challenge, but that's one thing that we hope will help. And then the other thing is spreading more information, and we've got some great fact sheets on our website, our headquarters website, on these two things. One, showing how reusing, construction demolition materials, reusing that on site, how that can feed right to the bottom line on project costs. There's an example in Emeryville, California. They reduced by almost $500,000 their construction costs of an affordable housing project on a brownfield, fed directly to the bottom line, and really made the difference between it being feasible economically and not. So reuse of materials and reuse of contaminated materials sometimes can be done and worked into the cleanup plan. That's something we're trying to provide more information on as well, and you can see that on the website.
We have time for one more question. Is everybody okay with that? Mary Ann? David, you had mentioned, actually commended today for its reclamation of mine-scarred land.
Right.
Are you finding that communities in the West just don't go there with respect to brownfields funding, thinking the stereotype might be that brownfields is just for Rust Belt states,
Right.
Rust Belt areas, and
Yeah.
things?
That may be, and maybe Ted and Johanna could speak to that when they talk, because they deal with this all the time. I think that's one issue. I think also that you have, kind of ties into the last question, I think you have more difficult challenges with reuse. And how do you reuse, for instance, a property that has been mine scarred because of where it may be located? There may not be, it doesn't jump to your mind how you can reuse it and get money there, private dollars leveraged. You notice when Charlie did his presentation that the majority of those great examples were in the Northeast. That's where, the brownfields are everywhere, as I said, but the majority probably are in these former industrial centers. More and more, though, we have, great examples, and we actually are making a concerted effort in our success stories that we try to post to show success stories that aren't in the upper Midwest and the Northeast. So communities can see, oh, here's a good idea, here's how we could do this. I know we're out of time, but just for example, that site that I talked about earlier in Nevada, in Reno, the tribal land. It was funny because I was at this session and the governor was there and he was talking about it. It turned out just before we went on that he said, yeah, my uncle used to own an egg farm right here and I used to candlelight eggs here. And I said, you may potentially have some liability. No, but he didn't. But what they did, the tribe was so forward-thinking. They worked with the city of Reno. They got this revolving loan fund loan for $900,000 to do the cleanup. They then went out and issued a bond, raised $20 million to build a community health center for the tribe. And what they'll end up being able to do, get the tax revenue back from this they're going to put a big box store there because that's what they need right there. They're going to be able to recoup that tax dollars, and it's going to be in the range of $8 million per year, pay the loan off early. In addition to being able to pay for that community development center, they're also going to build a sort of a halfway house for that area that will accept women, which they don't have any of those in that part of Reno. So, that's one we're working on a story right now to show, how just with a little bit of engineering, and also the region, the state and Region 9, we're really right there with them shoulder to shoulder to make it work. But That's a good question, and I'm going to take it back and again reemphasize we need to show examples in all parts of the country to encourage communities to look into this. Thank you.
I want to thank Mike and Charlie and David so much for their really informative presentations. We're going to break for about 15 minutes, and the next session starts at 10:30. One of the reasons we have these workshops is so that you all can come together and chat amongst yourselves. So we try to build time into the agenda so that you can ask each other questions and network with each other. So feel free to do that. We'll start promptly at 10:30. Also, be on the lookout next week. I'll be sending each one of you an email with the link to all of these presentations that are being given throughout the entire day. So be on the lookout for that. You'll be able to download them, and they'll be on the NALJIP website. So if you lose the email, you can go on the NALJIP website next week, so they'll all be there. So thank our speakers very much.